Get a load of this!
How's it going, guys? So I've been waiting for Shantae and the Seven Sirens to finally come to my doorstep for months. You know, I pre-ordered this back in May, I believe, and I've been waiting so long. It felt like this thing was never going to come out, that they were never going to ship out these copies. I mean, I knew that limited run would do it, but man, oh man, did they make everybody wait. And you could look on game FAQs, people were doubting it. They were on the message board saying are they ever going to ship these things? You know, pandemic or not, it felt really long, because I remember that Streets of Rage 4, I don't think I even had to wait that long, and that I remember pre-ordering right as the pandemic hit, and it didn't take that long. But Shantae, for some reason, took a hell of a long time. And I'm just finally glad I had it. Now, this game, you might have already played it, because it's been out since May on all the digital shops, you know, for the Switch, Xbox One. It's on Steam, PS4. But this was actually a timed exclusive. They released it in 2 parts for Apple Arcade, which I don't know how many people really use that service. I would assume there's definitely an audience that does, or else there wouldn't be an Apple Arcade. But it was for a time, and you know, I found that to be really unusual, because Shantae is pretty much a multi-platform sort of deal. It's been that way for years, since they brought the series back for Risky's Revenge. But we finally got a physical copy. I finally got it, and now I know I held off. I didn't want to play it digitally, because I figured if I've got it coming in physical form, why am I going to be paying for it twice? So I'm like, I'm patient, I could wait. And I did so. And guys, without further ado, I present to you my review of Shantae and the Seven Sirens. Shantae and the Seven Sirens is the 5th game in this series, and the first to take place solely in one location that is not Shantae's homeland of Sequin Land, but instead Paradise Island. In fact, Sequin Land doesn't even appear in this game. Scuttletown is nowhere to be found. Once you arrive at Paradise Island, that is where you will be spending the entire game. This is also a return to the style of gameplay that started this series, the Metroidvania. After Pirate's Curse introduced a deviation from it with choosing the island you wanted to travel to, and then Half Genie Hero, which got rid of the whole concept, Seven Sirens brings it back. It's good to see this style back, and while I'm not completely opposed to the style of the previous 2 games, it's good to know that developer WayForward is willing to experiment with the formula, and while still keeping a lot of the core gameplay at heart. Shantae and friends are invited to Paradise Island to participate in the Half Genie Festival, and soon enough everything goes to hell as 5 of the genies are kidnapped, and Shantae now is determined to get them back. Along the way, Shantae will run into her old nemesis Risky Boots, but will soon realize that that's not the only evildoer here, as she encounters the Sirens, who are the rulers of the island, but they're really not doing much ruling, as they're just hanging around in the boss rooms of the various dungeons.
Look at you. Why don't you do something with your life? Sit around here all day. You contribute nothing to society.
This time around, we've got the same amount as Pirate's Curse, actually, with 5 in total, and the final section of the game, which is pretty much a dungeon in itself. One thing I will say are these Sirens are nowhere as charismatic or cool as the Barons from the previous games. I really missed the zany personalities of those villains. Even if the Sirens have some great designs, at least Squid Baron stops by throughout the game in a very funny part involving Ammo Baron's brother, Armor Baron. Armor Baron says if you collect pieces of ore, he will create strong armor for you, and you're thinking you're about to get a really awesome power-up that will boost your defense, but instead the armor is used to incapacitate Shantae and her friend Sky, as they're sold to Squid Baron as action figures. This series is never afraid to get a little out there with the humor, and I appreciate it. Trust me, there's enough charm to go around. That's what made me fall in love with this series in the first place, and it's here in tremendous abundance. Speaking of colorful characters, the same dazzling graphics are back from Half Genie Hero, and nothing really looks better or worse for that matter. And I'm fine with that. If it ain't broke, don't fuck it up, I always say. The fast and fluid animation is just as spectacular as ever. So let's talk about the gameplay this time around. The animal transformations are back, and they're definitely more instantaneous than before. You no longer have to dance to transform like previous games. Instead, you can transform at the mere push of a button on the controller. Now, there are dances, but we will get to those in a bit. After rescuing a half genie from the dungeons, you will gain one of these transformations called Fusion Magic. There's the Dash Newt, which allows you to scale walls and dart over hazards, which is basically the exact same abilities as the monkey from the previous games, except you never get to learn an attack. The Gastro Drill, which allows you to burrow through sand, which feels the most limiting. The Bonker Tortoise, that allows you to slam down onto obstacles and enemies or charge it up and rocket off to do a fast-paced spin attack. Basically, whenever you see these stone blocks, you know to use the Tortoise Fusion, which is a blatant stand-in for the elephant transformation of previous games. I think this might be my favorite though, and I really like how you're basically an unstoppable wrecking ball, and I really like how you go spinning around as you shoot yourself out of these cannons in the sea vent lamp dungeon. It just makes for a really cool visual. The Frog Fusion is a very lame replacement for the mermaid transformation, which was my favorite transformation from the previous games, especially this weird mechanic where you get trapped in rooms until you collect all the coins. Now, when you have to do it while avoiding hazards, like during the Siren boss battle in the boiler dungeon, that makes sense, but when you just have to collect all the coins to just leave the room, well, this isn't much of anything really. The coins are the only obstacle, it's just weird. The Jet Octo Fusion is a fun triple jump, but I wish this useful move came into play earlier in the adventure. Overall, these fusions just feel inferior to all the awesome ones we had in Half Genie Hero, and there's less of them to boot, and unlike Half Genie Hero, you never get to upgrade them. However, I really do like how some of them are implemented into the overall progression of the game, because we have to talk about the map structure, and I really do love how the layout falls into place. Paradise Island's most interesting feature is the Sunken City, which is an underground labyrinth that feels like one big massive dungeon with many pathways to explore, and it's also where you will access the dungeons themselves. The rooms are connected by these tubes, which without a doubt were inspired by the classic Earthworm Jim Down the Tubes level. You also have warp rooms to help travel around down here, and even topside. One of my favorite parts is how deep and complex this sunken city gets, and it's reflected in the amazing soundtrack as well. As you go deeper and deeper into the subterranean depths of the city, the music changes. We start with a more upbeat, peppy tune that even draws a bit from the main title theme of Sonic 1. You hear it, right? Then as we progress further down in the catacombs known as the Mossy Biome, the music takes on a darker, creepier tone. And then when you run into a scientist who asks you to look for mermaid shells, your search leads you into the deep sea domain. A place so deep you can actually see the place shaking from the water pressure. And this music is so fucking creepy. It takes the cake for creepiness for the entire series, honestly. And I thought I was in store for some type of jump scare. This section is more unsettling than the sunken shipyard that has the actual ghosts. There is a tremendous sense of atmosphere in Seven Sirens, and the map design and music prove an effective combo to solidify that notion. And yes, let's take a moment to reflect on this awesome soundtrack that is actually not scored by the series' original composer Jake Kaufman for the first time in the series' history. Instead, a team of composers led by Professor Sakamoto took on musical duties. Many people have voiced their displeasure with this choice, and I think it's clouded their judgment on the actual quality of the soundtrack. And I gotta say, this might actually be my favorite soundtrack of the series. I'm serious. Or maybe to be safe, tied with Half Genie Hero. I mean, this whole series has excellent music, but this soundtrack seemed to really focus on mixing dance, classic sounding chiptunes, and well, there's a lot of different styles, but whatever's playing always fits, just like the other games. Professor Sakamoto put his own spin on things, and it's definitely distinguishable from the works of the great Jake Kaufman, but in a good way that still lives up to this series' high bar for auditory delights. If I had to pick a favorite, I might actually go with the dance my ass off worthy laboratory music. Oh yeah! And as a matter of fact, let's do just that. Now let's go back to the magic for a moment and talk about the fusion dances, which you get by obtaining fusion stones that allow you to borrow the Half Genie's magic after rescuing them from the dungeons. You get the Seer dance, which reveals hidden pathways, hidden statues that contain gems and invisible enemies. This thing had me checking each room like some kind of OCD freak of nature, scared I miss out on some good hidden goodies. The Refresh dance can clean up poisonous water and regrow these little plants that a lot of times contain nuggets, which can be used to purchase additional enemy cards, which, damn, we didn't even talk about yet. Basically, when you defeat an enemy, it may drop a card, and you can equip the total of 3 of these cards, each containing a different ability. One makes your hair whip stronger, another makes you crawl faster, and so on. It's fun to mix and match these. A nice additional collectible to keep you busy, and it's beneficial to the gameplay as well. Anyway, you've got the Spark Dance and Earthquake Dance to round things out, which both are screen filling attacks and are used to also manipulate the environment for progression. Overall, these abilities are fun, and I especially like having extra attacks, but I still wish we could have had more transformations overall. After having so many to choose from in Half Genie Hero, it's hard not to make the comparison, but it's merely a preference, and I don't want to whine and criticize Way Forward too much for wanting to differentiate the series and forbid them from trying new things, because the dances are good, but you see, the characters that pop up on screen that represent the magic being used, I wish we could become these forms. I'm sure that idea crossed the developers' minds, but ultimately, of course, this is what they went with. One of the things I like best is that there's so much stuff you pass by early on in the game that is inaccessible, and when you finally get the ability that allows you to access that area, it's so satisfying to go back and use that ability. Like early on, you see these fans, and you obviously know you're going to be using these, but how and when? Well, you'll have to keep playing to find out. There's a great sense of anticipation, and you look forward to progression, so you can use what you gain in your inventory to open up the map and delve deeper into the exploration. I like this type of game design that dangles things in front of you and entices you to keep playing and progress. Some could chalk it up to just being mere backtracking, but if you're completely put off by backtracking, then chances are you're not going to enjoy this game in the first place, or any game in the Shantae series for that matter. but those who appreciate a well-designed world will find much enjoyment in the exploration Seven Sirens offers. The dungeons are great additions to the series with some unique puzzles, my favorite probably being the Sea Vent Lab, but I'm a bit let down that the 5th dungeon, the Squid Pit, ends up basically being somewhat of an homage to the Battle Tower in Risky's Revenge, as you go from room to room fighting wave after wave of enemies as a timer counts down. This just comes across as a bit lazy and recycled. I would really have preferred a more difficult, puzzle-heavy dungeon. I get it's a way of testing your endurance, but considering we've already fought all these enemies at this point, fighting a large amount of them isn't exactly what I consider creative. Also, what's pretty glaring is the load times. Why, when entering a new area such as the Mossy Biome or one of the towns above ground, does the game have 15-second load times? This feels pretty long, especially compared to the other games in the series, and Half Genie Hero transitioned between different sections and saved your game all at the same time with almost non-existent loading. So what's the excuse here? Did it have to do with the formatting of the interconnected map? It is big, but I've seen shorter load times on a game like Pokemon Shield, which has an interconnected map of sorts as well, but this just felt very odd to say the least, and kind of seemed a bit like a technical problem of sorts, so I really wonder what exactly happened here. It's not a big deal, but it is something a bit suspect. Maybe my biggest disappointment with the game is how much less content it has than Half Genie Hero, because I think overall the layout of Seven Sirens is superior, but Half Genie had all those extra modes, like Friends to the End, where you could play as Sky, Roddy Tops, and Bolo, and none of them are playable here. You also had the Officer mode, which combined Shantae and the Mighty Switch Force universes for some really great puzzle-solving platforming that melded so well together. And who could forget finally getting to step into the boots of, well, Risky Boots in the Pirate Queen's quest. None of those fun extras, and not to mention full-fledged modes are here, making Seven Sirens feel a bit shortchanged. And I hate to call this great game lazy, because the game itself is great, and maybe the crowdfunding on Half Genie helped that game get all those amazing extras, but as a sequel, Sirens feels a bit light on the extras. I mean, just throwing in a magic mode where you play in the Hula Girl outfit and have less defense but more magic is not my idea of a fitting follow-up. In Half Genie, you basically had multiple games in one game, and it felt like a tremendous value. You just don't have that here. And I don't mean to sound greedy, and it kinda does sound that way, but when the previous entry was this way, and it's in the same exact series, it's kind of a hard fact to overlook, to be honest. And even though you could fire back and say many of those extras were merely reskins of the main game to begin with, they were different enough to warrant those multiple playthroughs. I really wanted another excuse to play through the Seven Sirens again, just as I did with Half Genie Hero, because I enjoyed it so much. But the magic mode just doesn't entice me enough, because that's just a bit too similar to the original game, with no new story or any real core changes to speak of. One thing this game has that Half Genie didn't is there's more voice acting. Half Genie had voices for Shantae and Risky, but that was about it. Now Sky, Bolo, Roddy Tops, and Uncle Mimic all finally get voices, but they're not complete voiceovers, sadly. Some lines of dialogue are voiced and others aren't. Not sure why they do this. Why not just voice all of them? How did they decide what lines to voice and which ones not to? Did the voice actors just choose their favorite lines? Sometimes the voice actors will say a line, but it's not even what's written in the dialogue boxes. It's relevant at least, but this is just a weird choice. But perhaps the improvement will in fact lead to full-on voice acting for the next game, because the voices provided are good and these are characters that deserve to be heard. I do have to say I really like the addition of the fully animated cutscenes at certain parts throughout the game, and before facing off against the Siren bosses, it really adds to the presentation and adds to the visual flair of an already great looking game. Despite some grievances, 7 Sirens still stands strong on its own despite the absence of the cavalcade of extras from the previous installment. And I'm very curious to see where WayForward will take this series, with a switch from Metroidvania to dropping the concept to returning to it once more. One can only imagine what is in store for us next. Well, that just about does it for this review, guys. I hope you all enjoyed it. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Click the bell so you get all notifications when I post on my new videos. I want to thank all my patrons for your continued support, and thank you to everyone who takes the time to watch my videos in the first place. Thanks again, guys. I'll see you next time.